In the last few years, Microsoft has introduced several different functions whose whole job is to help the Lambda function do whatever it wants to do. In this video, we'll talk about what the reduce function does. So this comes into a family that includes map, byrow, bycall, scan, and reduce. And it's all about how to apply a specific Lambda function. In the case of the map function, all of the different values stay in their position in an array, and we use a Lambda function against each one of those. In the by row, it goes row by row down the data set. In by call, it goes column by column across the data set. In the case of scan, it goes across the array, but it also creates the intermediate values along the way. And then finally, in this video, we'll talk about reduce. And reduce's whole job is to take a Lambda function, apply it against an array of cells, but the result is just a single value. So that's why it's reducing that array down to a single value. It's going to do something across the entire array, but finish with a single value at the end. So what's a scenario that might look like that? Let's say that you have the values of 20, 10, and 50, and what you decide you want to do is you want to go across these three values, do something to each of the three values, and then maybe summarize it, maybe with a sum function or something like that. So we take the reduce function, we put in an initial value of 0, and all of these values, 20, 10, and 50. And then we say, okay, if the value of a particular entry in this array is greater than 25, do one thing, and if it's not, do a different thing. And at the end, this whole thing will be reduced down to a single value that will be called A in this instance. And so the result in this case would be 92.5 because 20 is not greater than 25. So it just takes that and adds it to the 0. So we now have 20. Then we have the next value, which is 10. So we say, okay, 10 plus 20 is 30. And then we take our third value and we say, okay, the third value is greater than 25. So take that number, multiply it by 1.25, and then add that to the running total up until now and get us 92.5. Let's see this in a couple of real-world scenarios. So the reduce function's job is to reduce something down to a single value based on some sort of Lambda function. Now, oftentimes, the examples for this could also be replicated by other functions, so this first one's going to be something that you could use countifs for, but it's a good example of how the function operates. Here, I want to count up the number of entries where the year-to-date sales is in excess of this $500,000. So, in other words, I want to compare each one of these rows down and then reduce it down to one final value. To do this, we go to the Formulas tab at the top of the screen. We use the logical drop-down menu, and I'm going to find the reduce function. So the initial value here is going to be 0. There's no count currently. And the array of cells that we're going to work across is all of these cells that say year-to-date sales. And now what we need to do is build up a function in which we are able to count each one of the entries where it's greater than the value. So we use a lambda function here. Now, the lambda function takes two variables or arguments that are the things that are sort of helping us total this up. So the first is the accumulator. Here we'll just use the letter A as the accumulator variable, and the other one being each value of the array that comes in one at a time. So I'll use V here. And then after the comma, we need to figure out what kind of calculation we're going to use. And most of the time when we want to do some sort of test, we use the if function here. And we want to know whether the current value is greater than the quota. So I will do v, the current value, greater than, and then I'll just highlight cell G6 over here. And if that's true, if it's greater than 50,000, we will take the accumulator, what we're working with already, and then add the 1 to it, comma, otherwise basically don't do anything. We'll just do an A there, close the parentheses. And so what will happen here is that after the lambda function runs through, it'll say, is 356,800 greater than 500,000? And if it is, we will add 1 to the accumulator, and if not, we'll just keep the accumulator as it is. And then when we click OK, you can see there that it comes out with 8. So again, this would have been actually easier to do with the countifs function, but it's a good way of showing that it goes through one at a time, figures out what the result is, and then gives you back a single value. Of all the examples I've seen of this giving us something valuable, I think it's in the text cleanup area. Because more than anything else, in text cleanup, it's obvious that there are lots and lots of ways for text to be dirty, right? Text can be dirty because it's capitalized instead of lowercase. It could be dirty because there's too many spaces. It could be dirty because there's weird characters in it, all sorts of different reasons. So it would make sense that if there was a function that could go through a whole bunch of possibilities and at the end spit something out for you that was the cleaned result, it could be really helpful. So as you can see over here on the right side of the screen, I have some data, and there are lots and lots of problems with this data. It's not capitalized correctly, some things have too many spaces in them, and there are lots and lots of special characters that I might want to remove. So we go to cell J6 here, and we want to use a reduce function here to say, go through and substitute out all the problems, clean up all the issues, and give us just the good version of this data back. So to do this, we can use equal sign reduce. The initial value will be the initial text value that's coming in, and then after a comma, we'll use this set of cells over here on the right as the array of cells that it will be working across. And here I'll use the F4 keyboard shortcut to lock that in, comma, let's do a lambda function. Now, as I said, we want to take two variables here, two arguments, and it's a good idea to name these so you can make sense of them. The first is the value that we're working with coming in and saying, this is what's going to be spit out at the end of it. So here, maybe we'll name this clean underscore output. All right, so that'll be the content that we're spitting out at the end. And then the second one is what are we working through one at a time? And it'll be the current thing that we're trying to do. So here I will call it cur underscore care, because this is each of those different characters that we're trying to replace. And now what function are we trying to do? I'm going to use the substitute function, and the text that comes in will be the clean output, comma, what text are we trying to sub out? Oh, that's the cur care. What do we want to replace it with? Let's put in quotation marks, space, close quotation marks. So in other words, go through all the characters that are there, and if you find any of them in our current clean content, go ahead and sub them out for a space. Now, it's not quite enough yet, I think, Because also here, what if we have too many spaces? And what if we have weird capitalization? So what I'll do is around the substitute function, I will also put two other functions, one of them being trim. So the trim function to clean out the extra spaces, and we'll also use the proper function to capitalize everything appropriately. And then we'll close the parentheses on all of that and hit enter. And if you notice here, Harmony Bank, and then we have this weird character, that has been removed. Let's autofill down. And we can see that there are no special characters anymore. There's no extra spaces. All the extra spaces have been removed. And everything is capitalized appropriately.